Hi guys, I'm Ryker, this is Pastor Maria, and this is part 2. So we're just going to go over and go deeper into what Maria said this last Sunday when she was talking about Rahab.
Yeah, some good stuff. I think it was interesting because it's the first time that we started talking about a woman in the Bible.
Yeah.
First time we were talking about someone who didn't have the heritage of believing in the same God, like the Israelites, Jehovah. And so, a lot there that was different than the last ones we've gone through. But
Yeah. Rahab is definitely very different. And we can see she was someone who realized that you can never walk in fullness unless you leave your old life behind and actually fully trust in God.
Yeah, it was interesting because she was a woman that God, she heard about, like I talked about on Sunday, she heard about who God was, and she heard about his greatness, and she heard about all of these things he had done like the rest of the people had, but her response to that was very different than the rest of her nation. Like the rest of her nation was like, let's protect ourselves from this, and she was like, I want more of this. But with that, she had to make a choice. Like she couldn't live in both, so she couldn't stay loyal to the Canaanites and then also choose to follow Jehovah. She had to make a choice, and often I feel like we have to do that in our own personal lives too, and to walk in the fullness of what God has for us. We have to make a choice. Are we going to leave all of our old behind and walk in something new, or are we going to try and blend the two? And when we blend the two, it always just ends up like this, right? We all will end up in conflict.
Yeah.
And then you wonder why you feel like you're in conflict all the time. And it's like, well, often the first time you want to start, or where you want to start, is to sit back and say, okay, what am I trying to blend from who I used to be that isn't what God has said about me into who I feel like God wants me to be? Like, what am I trying to blend those two together? Because often that's the root of that conflicting spirit in us.
Yeah. So we know Rahab was a prostitute, but was she talked about in other places in the Bible, and what she was doing?
Super interesting about Rahab is that so she obviously talked about on Sunday, she ended up in the genealogy of Jesus.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about Rahab is she's one of the few females that when they give the genealogy of Jesus it's listed.
Right.
So majority of the time they're talking about the males, but for some reason there's a couple females that get thrown in there. Rahab is one of them. The other couple spots that she's talked about is in Hebrews 11. It basically goes through by faith how all of these men got to see the fullness of what God had for them, how God's plan was unrolled because of all these men. And then it goes through guys like Abraham and Moses, it goes through Joseph, and it goes through all of these different big events. And then down on chapter 11, verse 31, it says, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. The next verse goes on, and what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell you about Gideon and Barak and Samson and David and Samuel. So interestingly enough, when they wrote the book of Hebrews, they thought it was so important of what she did that they actually gave her a verse. Whereas a bunch of these other guys that we talk about just got lumped together. I don't have time to tell you about David and Samson and Solomon. And I don't have time to go into all of that. But I do have time to give a whole verse to talk about the faithfulness of Rahab.
Right.
You see that again over in James, I think it's chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 25. In the same way was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them out on a different direction. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. And so they talk about she heard the word of God and she heard about who God was, but we are not saved through deeds, but we do have to make a choice to accept what God is what we hear about God.
Yeah.
And in that choice often comes deeds. So it's not the deeds that save us, but often deeds follow us being saved. Right? And so I think it's interesting that they talked about that. They talked about Rahab, like and then it also says Rahab was considered righteous.
Yeah.
Like that's like up there with like Abraham and David. This is a prostitute woman who like really didn't know who God was, but because she just chose to live by faith and accept him, she's all of a sudden called righteous. And I think that gives us such hope on God isn't really expecting us to do something amazing.
No.
Like he's not expecting us to go out and like change the world. He's just expecting us to be faithful in what he's put in front of us. And through that, he'll change the world. Like it seems to be the theme we keep on coming back to, right? Is that our job is to be faithful in what he's asking us to do. His job is to like change the world.
Yeah.
Like, and so through our actions, he might do that, but it's not us doing it. It's just by her being faithful, all of a sudden she was counted as righteous. Everything she was before was just like wiped clean. Like it didn't matter that she was a prostitute. It didn't matter that, that she had this. We talked about that she probably had a house of prostitution. She had like basically, a brothel going on, and like none of that mattered. It was like the choice to be obedient and to accept God's grace. Everything changed. Yeah. Like none of it mattered. And I think that I was talking to someone after church on Sunday about how often we can live in the guilt of our past and think we need to do something great with our future because of all the mistakes we've made.
Right.
Or we can live under the pressure and the anxiety of needing to do something great. And really one of the songs we sang on Sunday was really about God. We can't change our past and we're not in tomorrow, but God's in the now. Yeah. And so just learning to live in his presence now, learning to live in the now shifts our identity to really just being, I get to just be your kid, and then whatever you do, you can do. Like, you're big enough. Yeah. You are God. I don't need to do it. And I think Rahab, that's what she saw through the Israelites, is that God was big enough to take care of them. All they had to do was just listen, right? So, I think that's really inspiring that this woman who wasn't brought up that way, it wasn't something that she was taught to believe. Yeah. It was just, she just heard about his like greatness and was like, I want to be part of that. And then chose to. And then all of a sudden now has this legacy of being righteous and being faithful. And, the blessing to the world through Jesus Christ came through her. And she got her name in that lineage because she just was like, I want that. I want all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty awesome. And I like what you said about identity. And like on Sunday when you were preaching, you said, like the world will continue to pull you back and give you their identity of what they think you are. Like people would have been saying like, no, Rahab, you can't do that. You're a prostitute. Like you shouldn't be doing this type of thing. Like,
absolutely.
But like, as long as she focused and like put and said her identity was in God and who like being God's child. Yeah. That is where you, Yeah,
absolutely. And I think she really grasped that. Why do I think that? I mean, it doesn't really say that, but you think, she knew she was giving up everything she had known, or at least she knew who she was. Yeah. Right? Like everyone knew who she was, whether or not it was good or bad. She still had a piece of identity, giving all of that up to go into a new nation that I'm sure humanity was the same then as it is now, which means the rumor mill is going. Yeah. Like they're knowing like these two spies got saved by this prostitute and covered by this fabric on the rooftop. And now we're going to have to save her because they had to tell everyone that this house you're not allowed to touch because this is the woman who saved us. And so knowing that she's also walking into a whole new nation with this over her head, like that people know I'm a prostitute. That's who I am. And she had to really know herself, saying, I'm not going to have any friends. I'm going to have my brothers and my sisters and my parents. Like, that's basically what I'm going to have. Everyone else is going to have preconceived ideas of who I am, but still choosing to say that I want to walk in the fullness of God and not in what the world says about me. But I promise you that every other day for the first little while, she would have had someone, because she was the outsider, someone coming to her and saying, oh, hey, aren't you the prostitute that saved the spies? And they may not be meaning it poorly. Like often people in our lives don't mean to pull us back in, but they still will attach us to who we used to be.
Right. Yeah.
Like they'll still say, aren't you the one that this, and this happened to? Mm-hmm. Aren't you the one that was an alcoholic and now is not? Aren't you the one that was, in that really abusive relationship and now you're not? Mm-hmm. Aren't you? And a lot of times it's like, people don't mean that to be bad, but it can put this weight on you of saying, well, that's my identity, is who I used to be and who I'm trying to be now, instead of like, none of that matters. Your identity doesn't live in either of those places. Your identity just lives in the now of being God's child and saying, I don't know who I'm going to be. It doesn't matter who I was. I can't change that. It just matters who I am right now. Right now, I am a daughter of a God who loves me, and wherever that takes me, great.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't matter. But people have lots of misconceived ideas about who you are and how you function. And I think Rahab probably had to do what most of us do, which is let time defend us. Like, God's big enough to defend our reputation and our who we are, our character. He's big enough to do that. And so we just have to live and let him be our defender. And our world is likes to fight. Like, whether or not we say we do, we like to kind of have a fight. And so with this identity piece, it really comes down to making a choice to say, I don't need to fight my identity. I don't need to prove anything. That God's big enough to prove my character, to prove who I am, who he is. He doesn't need us to do his job,
Yeah. Right. So Rahab didn't just have to like trust God. She also had to trust others too, right?
Yeah, which is super interesting. And I didn't really expand on it, but when you think about that, she had to trust these men that she did not know.
Yeah.
So these were foreigners. They were men. So we're talking about a prostitute woman who had probably been abused by men a whole lot in that culture, especially having that title, was used to them treating her like a piece of meat. But yet she had to trust these men, like actually put her life in their hands and say, I'm going to trust that you were going to take care of me. And I think that ties back to reputation.
Right.
Like, these men had a reputation of being part of the Israelites. Again, she had heard about the Israelites. She had heard that God was faithful to these people. She had heard that they were people of honor. Like, she had heard about their reputations. And so when they came to her door, that she could make a choice of functioning from what she knew of men and foreigners, or make a choice of functioning from what she'd heard about who God was. And God had said that this nation is mine and that these people are mine. And so that's a huge leap of faith that she had to take, not only with God, but with others. And I think sometimes, like, life happens and we get knocked down and we get treated poorly, and that can cause us to put up barriers. And the amount of times I've heard someone say, like, well, I love God, but I don't love the church. I love God, but I don't love people.
Right.
Like, I love God, but I just want to do life on my own. And it's like, well, it's not God's fullness. And so when you really know who you are, then when man screws up, it doesn't affect you quite as much. When man says things and makes mistakes, you have a lot more grace for that, because you recognize that your value isn't in what they think. And so I think that is a good lesson for us, is that God didn't intend us to be alone. He didn't intend me to function on my own, or Ryker to function on his own, or you to function on your own. He intended us to work together as one body with many parts. And in order for us to be a healthy body with many parts, that means each of those pieces needs to be plugged into where they're supposed to be plugged in. That takes a lot of grace. Because with each other as human beings, we're not God, which means we're going to screw up all the time and we're going to hurt each other all the time. And we need to pick ourselves up and say, I'm not going to function today on yesterday's hurts. I'm going to function today on today. And that God healed me from yesterday's hurts, and today's a new day. Because when we kind of let those hurts like start to build up like this, then we end up very guarded and not actually getting to walk out in the fullness. So when someone comes to our door that says, oh, I need to have a leap of faith to trust you because I feel like that's what God's asking me to do, but now my vision is skewed because of everything that's happened that I've let build up.
Right.
And so I think that there's some key there of learning to unpack your baggage along the way as well with God. Don't let things get to a point of where it is insurmountable. Like, it's really hard to get past it. And I think the love of the church, the love of each other, is because we sometimes do that. We don't like conflict.
Yeah.
And so instead of just like having a conversation saying, hey, you hurt my feelings, that wasn't okay, and here's why, and you saying to me, well, but you hurt me, and here's why, and us hugging it out and saying, okay, we may not agree, but we're gonna move forward. That's really the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about Rahab, or anything?
Yeah, it's not really about Rahab, but I just did think I touched it on Sunday. I just want to mention it again. The difference between heart postures. So we had Moses that came in with the Israelites, and his heart posture was, let's go see if God's plan is viable. Let's go see if his promises are viable. And so he sent all those spies in. But really, they weren't being sent in to see how we can do this. It was just to see whether or not it was possible. Whereas Joshua comes in, a different generation, had just spent 40 years and said, okay, I'm going to learn from the past. I'm going to learn from past leaders, from past people in my life, learn from what Moses did wrong, and I'm going to do it differently. I'm sending 2 spies in. But I think Joshua's heart posture was different. Joshua's heart posture was, I'm going to go in and see how this is possible. And sometimes our outlook with God needs to be, okay, God, you said this, so I'm not going to question whether or not that's going to happen. I'm going to ask the question of, how is that going to happen?
Oh, yeah.
Instead of, is it going to happen?
Yeah.
And that is a very different heart posture with God. One is allowing and willingness to say, okay, God, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there. The other one is like, well, I want to kind of evaluate whether or not I want to take the risk.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we live in safety with God instead of living in a bit of risk.
Yeah.
And we need to live in a bit of risk. Like, God actually asks us to. You see that through Joshua. You see that through Rahab. You see that through, everyone we've looked at, everyone we will look at. There's this level of risk that they needed to be okay with, that it wasn't very safe.
Yeah.
That God's plan isn't always safe.
Yeah, that was a pretty common theme the last few weeks, is like they had to leave their comfort zones.
Absolutely.
To actually do God's work.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just outlook. It's like you need to decide. Before you go, you need to decide, I trust God and his promise, or I don't.
Yeah.
And then you figure out how's the how. Yeah. So I remember James and I were talking to someone about something we wanted to do, and we're like, oh, we'd love to, but I just don't understand. I don't know if that'll happen. And they said, okay, well, why? Why will it happen? I'm like, well, because that's a lot of money to do that. And although we think it'd be great and what God wants and all those things, and their response back was, well, then do you not believe who God says he is? You're asking the wrong question. You're not asking, you need to stop asking whether or not God's going to do that. If he said he's going to do it, he's going to do it. And start just trying to align yourself with how he's going to do it. Yeah. And that's really different, because we look through human eyes, not through God eyes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We look at our lives, we look at the world around us through practicality. And God is, everything in here is very impractical.
Yeah.
Most of it is most of it people would be like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
You are a nutcase. This does not make any sense.
I think that's going to be it for today. I'll see you next week on part 2. If you like this video, make sure you like it and share it. If you want to leave a comment or ask any questions, put them down below. If you have anything you want to hear next week on part 2, let us know too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Any big questions, just ask.
Yeah. All right. See you later.
Bye. So much lettuce. Yeah. That's good.